So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Harris. I'm with the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice here at the law school. On behalf of Professor Brown Nagin and Dean Manning, welcome to the law school. We have a very special event today. I don't want to spend a lot of time up here. Some of you might have seen this film when it screened a few months ago at the MFA. When was that, Craig? It was a while ago. Yeah, last year, right. And we're going to have Craig kick us off and be involved in a Q&A afterwards. So I don't want to say too much, but I was just talking to my colleague about some refuse fascism stuff, and I realized that the film we're going to see today has a certain urgency as we think about what's happening in our country, and we think about the role of the police, and we think about whether or not we are drifting toward fascism, as some of us think we're steadily on the way. So today's screening is part of several things, including a transformative justice program that's run out of the Ed School. And some of our other co-sponsors today are the Prison Studies Project, the Harvard Graduate School of Education, the Office of Student Affairs, Criminal Justice Policy Program here at the law school, and the Fair Punishment Project. We'll be continuing a series of screenings in the spring. I encourage you to, if you aren't already on our email list, to visit our website, charleshamiltonhouston.org, sign up. We'll be screening a film called Agents of Change, which is a film about the Black student uprising in 1968. A film called 3.5 Minutes, 10 Bullets, which is a stark portrayal of the murder of a black teenager in Jacksonville, Florida, by a policeman. And Without a Net, the digital divide that looks at how the internet is continuing to expand rather than close gaps in our society. Before beginning, I have to, as always, give all thanks and praise to my colleague, Kelly Garvin, who makes all these things happen miraculously. And I also want to give a special thank you to Laura Hartrick, who can't be with us today, but worked on this film with Craig and really helped arrange to get everything going here, and I owe her a great debt of gratitude. So as I said, we're doubly blessed today to have this film and to have its director, Craig Atkinson, with us. I'm not going to kind of read your bio out loud and all that stuff, but he's going to introduce the film, as I said, and I suspect we'll learn a little bit about him and what's relevant to this film as he talks during the Q&A. But you should know that his works have been highly praised. He's been nominated for he's been shortlisted for a couple of Academy Awards for his work, and is a documentarian of the first order. And as always, everyone here in Boston has to have a connection. He has an Emerson College. He has an MA from Emerson, and so has some Boston roots. So with no further ado, I give you Craig Atkinson.
Or I can use that too. That might be easier. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I'm sure it's a busy season for everyone, so I appreciate the time and the interest, and obviously the topic, but also the film. I won't say too much. Hopefully the film will speak for itself. Some people want to know how I came to the project. My initial interest was because my father was a police officer for 29 years outside of Detroit, and he was a SWAT officer for 13 of those years. So I kind of grew up with the war on drugs era of policing just unfolding in the dinner conversations in my own house. I hadn't really thought of anything since he retired in 2002 until I saw the Boston Marathon bombing and the response to the Boston Marathon bombing. I was sitting in my apartment in New York and just seeing the level of equipment and more so the approach to the community where they were entering homes without search warrants, detaining people without charge, and this type of behavior was really alarming to me, even though we were under a terrorist threat in a time where you might say that this equipment is justified. I also found out afterwards that the surrounding police departments, because they were self-deploying and there was no central command and people were coming from the western part of the state and all over the place, that the surrounding area police departments actually shot their own people 12 different times during that exchange, 12 different cases of friendly fire. One situation where two undercover cops were trying to return to their barracks, and they were in an unmarked car that looked like the Tsarnaev brothers' car, or the one they were supposedly fleeing in. and a SWAT team pulled up next to him and like opened fire on the car, almost killing their own undercover officers. So knowing the history of, what my dad went through, not having, very good equipment to do, put down some of the more violent crimes that they were experiencing outside of Detroit during that era, and then seeing what the cops had been given, and then the lack of training, to me, at least spoke to a training issue, but I was curious to know kind of what had happened from my father's era to now. We kind of discovered that while making the film, and we can, leave that discussion until afterwards. If there's any questions. So thanks again. We kept the film short, 72 minutes. It's rather intense. Kept it short for that reason, but it also leaves plenty of time for discussion. So I'm looking forward to the questions, comments, criticisms, anything you may have afterwards. So thank you so much again. See you in 72 minutes. Thanks everyone for sticking through all that. Questions? Sir? Hold on a second.
Thank you. Amazing. Thank you for the work. But I might have another question later, but right off the top of my head, what was that last scene? Who was that guy, and what was that setting in which he's sort of a cross between a preacher and a sort of like a white supremacy rally?
Sure. We kept hearing about this trainer, Dave Grossman. We filmed in about 22 states. And no matter where we went, it was either someone had a backpack with his patch or with his saying sheepdog on it, or we would hear other rumors about this almost ubiquitous character, Dave Grossman, and we had the opportunity to film a police training seminar, and he was on the roster, so we signed up for the class. And we sat there for 8 hours and was just astounded by the rhetoric that he was teaching American law enforcement with. This whole idea that you are men and women of violence, and violence is your tool, and violence is your goal. He is someone that spent 25 years in the military, helping the military improve their kill ratio, meaning that it was very hard for servicemen and women to pull the trigger on an enemy combatant, historically speaking, because it was so close and so gruesome. And so the military derives a way to basically do it through rote memorization, or pop-up targets where you see an enemy and you kill, and you see an enemy and you kill. And he improved the kill ratio to the time, I think that it was about 30% in the early World War II, the number of people willing to pull the trigger on an enemy combatant. And by Vietnam, it became 90%. And it was Dave Grossman's philosophy and training that helped the military increase that kill ratio. Well, he's since left the military, and he spent the last 25 years teaching law enforcement the exact same rhetoric. And I think it really starts to narrow down why we see people reaching for their wallet and getting shot 6 times. And it's horrifying. We did a short video that came on the New Yorker website subsequently called Conditioned Response, that we digged a little bit deeper into his training. But it was devastating to find out that the officer that killed Philando Castile in Minnesota had been trained by Dave Grossman only a few months prior. Philando Castile was reaching for his wallet and got shot and killed. And that officer, Geronimo Yans, had been trained by Dave Grossman. Not saying it's directly causal, but you think if you got a hold of that officer and said, this is your community, you're here to protect and serve, and drilled that into him for 8 hours, maybe the outcome would have been different. I don't know.
Just a quick follow-up. So are anybody in law enforcement, I know there's the former chief of police of Seattle, whose name escapes me for the moment.
Norm Stamper.
Yeah, who's awesome on a lot of this. But is there anybody, who are the people in law enforcement who are monitoring when somebody comes back from a conference and they hear about it and they say, no, that's not right. We don't want our officers going to that training. And so where is the monitoring of those kinds of seminars and trainings, and who are the people who are leading sort of the opposition, if there are any?
Well, these are paid for by the departments. I mean, your taxpayer are sending your men and women of law enforcement into those seminars. So they're encouraged. It's not that there's oversight. They want to go back and make sure that you got his training. There's a few individuals. I mean, we met officers throughout, almost every community, 1 or 2 officers trying to reform their department. But it's a very hard thing to do because they're going up against a pack mentality that is totally going in the opposite direction. So we've had an opportunity to take the film around to police academies and police departments throughout the country. We've done hundreds of screenings with law enforcement, hoping to put this in front of them and give them a tool as well, so that those officers who are trying to reform their department say, this is what we've been talking about, because there's not that many examples. that, kind of give them also something to speak about to their administration. But there's no oversight. In fact, it's encouraged. We did have a protest group find out after the film came out that Grossman was going to teach one of their classes in the community, and they protested against it, and they got it shut down. So I think that was in California. I think it's San Jose, California. Yeah.
So I should tell people there's another Dave Grossman who used to teach here at Harvard Law School.
Oh,
who was
don't be sending him nasty grams this
human
afternoon.
being, and it's really sad to associate his name with this practice, but he was a really good guy.
I don't know if James Comey mentioned in his speech to other police officers about monsters. When he was a teenager, he was held hostage in his own home, and they never caught the guy. And I don't know if that has something to do with the fact that he sort of preaches that philosophy of saying, yes, there are monsters.
Interesting point. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
but, fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, when the film came out, no one knew who James Comey was. Everyone was like, who's that guy? Now, it was interesting after all this stuff that you'd hear like hisses in the audience, during the election. But he was an unknown figure when we were filming. We just got lucky. Sir?
Yeah, I'd like to tag on to the first question. There's concentrating on when they're on the range, it said 40% of the folks were ex-military.
Mm-hmm.
And then the man in blue T-shirt, he says, we got to be careful. We got to be careful who we put in uniform.
Mm-hmm.
So, how many of these people going into uniform have had PTSD?
Mm-hmm.
Been treated for PTSD
Or not, right?
or not?
Right. We were with an officer in South Carolina who was like, "Oh, you're filmed with the MRAPs?" I was blown up in an MRAP, and he told me he had only gotten back, I think, 18 months prior. He said he had severe PTSD. He almost killed his wife and kids. He grabbed the steering wheel and ran off the road when he first got back because he thought someone was going to shoot from an overpass in South Carolina. Now, obviously, there is that contingent of officer. However, what people don't realize is that the military has very clear use of force engagement, and a lot of times that the military officers that come back are actually more comfortable with combat rather than a police officer who's never seen it and actually gets really scared and quick to pull the trigger. There was a interesting, fascinating, horrifying situation that happened last year in West Virginia where there was an ex-military officer, veteran, came back, joined the law enforcement department in that community, and was called to a situation that was suicide by cop. Someone didn't want to live. He wanted to have a cop shoot him to end it. He had a gun by his side. It wasn't loaded. Obviously, no one knew it at the time. And the officer had been in combat. So he just walks up to the kid and was basically being the hero that we all ask our officers to be. He's like, I'm not going to shoot. He had his gun out. If he would have made a move, he would have shot him. He's like, I'm not going to shoot you, but you don't have to die today. And he starts a dialogue with this guy, and he starts to calm him down. 2 officers from his department go around, shoot the guy in the back of the head, and kill him. The officer that didn't shoot the guy got fired for putting his officers' lives in danger. So it's not always cut and dry. Hey, military personnel are coming back with PTSD, and they're running wild loose. In some circumstances, I'd much rather have highly trained military people in uniform because they're more comfortable with combat. It's a gray area. It's not always so cut and dry, but certainly there is that other side of it where there have been droves of military personnel coming back, and anything about conditioned response or muscle memory, you put on the exact same tools of war and you're running in houses Fallujah style, it's hard to separate it mentally. You can't separate it mentally, and I think that further leads to old ladies hearing that there's someone in their house and cops end up shooting her because she comes out with a gun or something to protect herself.
In closing.
Oh, that was in West Virginia. If you Google West Virginia officer fired for not shooting, you'll find it. I would hope that officer went on and became an officer in a community because obviously.
I was particularly concerned about the psychological profiling.
Mm-hmm.
The
data analysis.
the data analysis, the propensity to commit violence,
mm-hmm.
and the unborn murderer.
Mm-hmm.
So in what context is law enforcement using that type of analysis? Was this as regards parole decisions that hold Darth Vader,
Started with
Luke
parole.
Skywalker,
Started in Philadelphia in parole.
idiocy?
Yes, they started to use it for parole decisions, and they can show statistically how they're actually more accurate. So it's hard to argue in certain circumstances. However, LAPD has been using it for about 2 years in a program called Laser, where they're ingesting all the social media profiles, any data they can get, and comparing it to known criminals. And if you fit a profile and you might be saying something online, you'll get a preemptive knock on the door just to make sure you're doing okay. These are people maybe who have been arrested in the past and they're checking up on this type of thing. The problem with using algorithms to determine human behavior is that it's only going to be as good as the data set. And what are they using for a data set? A lot of the data set is CompStat data. CompStat data is crime statistical data tracked over a period of time in one geographic region. The problem with that is that they started using CompStat data as a performance matrix for police chiefs. So if you didn't have crime going down in your community, you didn't get the promotion, you might not be eligible for federal funding. So what police chiefs started doing is, aggravated assault, no, that's a simple assault. And so they started to change the labeling process for their actual CompStat data. That is the data that this guy is now using to determine whether or not your fetus is going to kill someone in 18 years. So I think what we're going to find is that we're crystallizing our old notions of who commits crimes. We're crystallizing our old notions of race. And we're going to be finding what we're already looking for. I mean, these are closed feedback loop systems that basically turn out the election that we just had.
Yes, thank you. And I have two questions. So one is this, following up with the question that this gentleman had over there, which is the combination of the data that high probability that an unborn will be a killer, and then improving the kill ratio. So, and the role of implicit bias may play is that because the cops has to make a decision probably within a half a second, and if he's trained to shoot, and then there's implicit bias in the head that this kid from this community is probably a violent person or most likely to commit the crime.
Sure, so it's more likely that they would shoot. Yeah.
Right, shoot. So I think that this is something very very difficult for me to understand. Also, I am interested how the political leaders, specifically the elected mayors, governors, and you have a video where the city council probably they are voting, right? How they have taken your documentary and what they have said about the use or how they will change or not change.
Sure. Well, I mean, what we saw in New Hampshire, it's very hard for elected officials to go against the police department. If the police chief shows up and says, hey, can you accept free money to protect officer safety? The community is usually behind something like that. So it's always when we're going around and hearing from police chiefs, they're like, well, we need this equipment to fight ISIS. And as soon as they get it, they turn around and use it for low-level drug offenders. And the frequency with which they're using is for drug offenses. So the police departments will say, well, wouldn't it be helpful for an officer to show up to a house and it knows your address and they can ingest all all your social media posts and everything and analyze it to tell that officer approaching a domestic violence situation what you might be capable of or inclined to. But the problem with that is that, again, you don't know why that person was arrested to begin with. You don't know all the causal factors. And just to have like a summary, judgment right before you have to go make a split-second decision.
Right, but in addition to the implicit bias, now you're talking about computerizing these decisions.
Right. Well, that's what he's talking about.
That was
right.
really chilling.
Right. Yeah. Like does the computer pull the trigger on a Hellfire missile? And I think that's where we start to really screw up as humanity. When you're letting computers decide the life or death of a human, I mean, we've crossed a serious line. But we're there. We're there.
And it's just been brought back from the data on civilian casualties in Syria, I guess, in airstrikes.
Right.
Pentagon now had to acknowledge that their numbers aren't right. It's
Way higher.
more-
Oh,
way
yeah.
More
Oh, yeah.
per incident
Yeah.
or per attack
Right.
than was previously.
Right. I mean, how many times do we have the spinning wheel on your Mac? That's going to happen, and you don't want that happening with a drone firing a Hellfire missile. I mean, it's going to happen. I mean, statistically, they'll say, well, computers make decisions faster, but I just don't know as a society, yeah, they do, that we need ever robots to determine the life or death of a human. I'm just completely against that on face value.
I have two questions. So the first one is, what was the filming process like when you were on the ground with these cops, and like, how did they receive you? Were they like excited to show you all these things? And then my second question, one of the things I thought was kind of conspicuously missing from this was Israel and like their kind of militarized civilian control, and like there's an
Everyone
NYPD
always brings up
office there.
Israel when we talk
Yeah,
about this.
because it's connected.
There's a porous relationship between American law enforcement and Israel. The NYPD has a full-time staff station in Tel Aviv. So
ADL takes municipal police departments over to Hebron.
yeah, I mean,
Being
the
shut down all the-
Israelis showed up during the Boston Marathon bombing. They were consulting for the police departments. I don't know why, but they were. The police tolerated our presence. I can't say that they ever loved us being there. It would help if I said my father was a law enforcement, officer in the past. Kind of would drop the wall, but it would still create a 3 to 8 week process of us negotiating some sort of access, and a lot of the time it got pulled. I think a lot of people are like, why would they ever show you a raid like that? Why would they ever show you that? Well, to give you some context, my dad was on SWAT for 13 years. They did 29 search warrants total. And you go out with a team that we're going out with, they're doing 2 to 3 a day, over 200 a year. This is another day on the job for them. They don't see that it's wrong. They do this 3 to 4 times a day. So we were just along for another day in the life of this particular agency, which is horrifying to think about. But we didn't cover the full range of the SWAT officer experience or the full range of the use of SWAT. I'm not against the equipment if it's used to pull people out of a nightclub from the Pulse nightclub shooting or the Las Vegas shooting. Great, keep it for that. But to turn around and use it for low-level drug offenses is where we start to see the horrible abuses that are taking place. But they never really were too on board. We almost had to steal every scene and every moment that we actually got. I'm sorry.
So I have either two questions, or a comment and a question. I don't know if you choose to address the first one as a question.
Like.
So ironically, in your very last shot, I don't know if you're aware of it, but there is a board behind the speaker. And Baslan is mentioned on that board. I don't know if you noticed.
Mm-mm. Was it?
Baslan, B-A-S-L-A-N. That was in 2004, where almost 400 children were killed.
Oh, yeah, sure. I do know what you're speaking of, yeah.
And this year, in 2017, European Court of Human Rights has issued a ruling where they're accusing the Russian government for not taking enough precautions. Majority of precautions that they're talking that they didn't take is a surveillance and everything else that got criticized in the film.
Sure.
So that's the first one. I don't know, again, if you want to address it as a question or as a comment. The second one is, in August, as we were participating in a free speech demonstrations, not only, first, as I was walking to the bandstand, and I have aphantasia, it's a spatial inability to find things, and there was a lot of police barriers to get to the bandstand. And so I couldn't find any of my group. I asked the protesters how to get there, and they said, don't ask it out loud. I said, why not? The freedom of speech has not been canceled. And they said, because if people find out, we would be scared for your safety, they would kill you here. So when I made it there, the police had to evacuate us because the protesters were throwing stones at us. And if the police officer was not wearing a helmet and did not move his head to the right in time, I would have been dead and not talking to you right now. It would have been really lovely if there was a droids who could find out who was that person throwing that stone at me to kill me.
Sure. To address the first issue with as far as technology and having it in place to prevent terrorism, we had the largest surveillance network that the world has ever seen prior to the Marathon bombing, prior to all the shootings that came out subsequently. The Electronic Frontier Foundation looked at the sneak and peek provision of the Patriot Act, which is the most invasive, one of the most invasive, facets of the Patriot Act, where law enforcement can come into your home and search your home and tell you about it after the fact if they would like to. And when you look at the numbers, there was 11,000 warrants issued for sneak and peek provisions so that officers could enter homes. 51 of those were for terrorism, and over 9,000, the rest of them were for drug crimes. So we have all the surveillance technology that would ever be needed to solve these issues. We're not using it for those issues. We're using it instead for drug crimes and all these other milieu issues that were never supposed to be used, have these high surveillance technology items used for it. We talked to one provider that took the exact same IBM platform that the NSA uses to do mass data surveillance. And they were licensing it to police departments for $1,000 a year. And we asked how they were using it, and they took us to the West Virginia University and showed how they apprehended a girl for smoking a bowl of weed before going to bed. So we have like the largest surveillance dragnet used on college campuses now for finding gram and a half of weed. I think that I'm very sorry for your experience. I think that the same thing I saw in Ferguson. Obviously, I want police officers to be protected when they need to be, but in Ferguson, they didn't allow the protests to happen. They had law enforcement show up in the full regalia from the beginning and never facilitated a protest, which is what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to put plainclothes officers amongst the protests and facilitate the protest rather than meeting it with the full force of everything that they have and never been trained with. And that, when they showed up with a presence, that's what escalated the situation. So it's hard to point blame on the protesters or the cops. I mean, should the cops even be there in the full riot gear, or should they be there facilitating it? It's obviously a gray area. No one should be hurt on either side, and I'm sorry for your experience. But I've seen it to be a very complicated issue on whether the cops should even be there to begin with.
But if the cops were not there, I would have been dead.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you protect police from the urine bottles thrown at the police?
I don't think you can. Raincoats.
Hi. This was a very chilling movie, and I wanted to ask if you ever show it to Republicans, if you ever show it to people in rural communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and do they applaud or do they, how do they respond?
I'm not in a room full of Republicans? Shocking. I would say, surprisingly, this film is accessible to Democrats, seemingly Republicans, Libertarians. Everyone kind of pulls something different away from it. I can't say that their issues are involved with who this equipment is being used on. It's more from the fiscal standpoint of why are they giving equipment away that they're buying new again? And they usually come at it from that angle. But Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians have been horrified by the film. We've shown it in rural Alabama, all over the country, all different sizes communities, all different political stances. We've screened in 50 cities throughout the country. We did like 45 film festivals, completely across the board. And most people have the exact same response. They're horrified by the film for various reasons and varying degrees, but I think it is kind of unfortunately universally horrifying for people.
Okay. I have two comments.
Yeah.
One, what was described as a free speech rally was actually a very thin veneer cover for a white supremacist rally in the Boston Commons. And there's more than one documented incident of black youth and Antifa escorting these white supremacists out of harm's way. So let's just be clear about the nature of that rally and what was going on in the Commons. My second question, though, is has there been any difference in the response from your audiences since the presidential election?
It's very interesting. People were like, your film was pretty scary before the election, but now it's really scary. Yeah, most people, it seemed to elevate everything. Like David said in the beginning, the urgency of it, I think people really started to feel more urgent about what they were seeing unfold. Yeah, it changed the entire timbre of the feeling in the room. I remember specifically we were in Rhode Island after the election and just feeling, the intensity in the room was pretty overwhelming, and people were locked in and they wanted to know what they can do, and they want to become active now. Before it was like, oh, we're going to be fine. But yeah, I mean, it absolutely changed since the election. Absolutely. Yeah.
I need to introduce myself a little bit because for the question, I'm from the Middle East, from Yemen exactly. And the tipping point in the movie for me was the long line of the
MRAPs?
Yeah. It's such. And the question that came to my mind is that with America now not interested in having boots on the ground and withdrawing from Iraq and Afghanistan, all these are sceneries. Like, what is the link of arms corporations in instigating all of this militarization? Sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you have like the Armored Bearcat Company. They saturated the U.S. market. They have 96% adaptation in all major U.S. cities. They ran out of market share. They're now selling in Yemen. They're selling in the Middle East now, these vehicles. Northrop Grumman is the technology provider that does the license plate readers and the facial scanning. You're talking about, the DOD is responsible for about $5 billion worth of equipment transferred total. But since 9/11, Homeland Security Department gave $34 billion away. And a lot of that was grants that would then be turned over to the police department that then would be turned over to private corporations that would then make money from the acquisition of those vehicles. So if we don't think they're lobbying and pursuing those, we filmed with one of them, and they have an in-house grant writing department. So they'll approach a police department that they think they can get a grant for, write their grant for them, have them submit it, and loop the money right back around to them. So that is a huge component of this whole thing, the arms dealing in those companies and pushing that. And the other thing is that you're having technology companies make police departments sign non-disclosure agreements. So the Harris Corporations makes the Stingray, which basically acts as a fake cell phone tower. So if they had it parked outside, all of our cell phones would be pinging against it rather than the cell community. And they've been able to use this for warrantless phone tapping for the last 8 years. Well, the Harris Corporation made all the police departments that they issued this to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So they can't even tell their citizens how they're being used. It's not even coming out in discovery. And I was filming or showing the film in Brooklyn, and the Brooklyn Defenders Group, the public defenders in Brooklyn, came up and were astounded because they couldn't understand how the police got information on their clients. They couldn't understand. It was not plausible whatsoever. And it started to become a little bit more clear, well, maybe they're using these things that they're actually not revealing because of these non-disclosure agreements. It's a huge thing driving all of the technology adaptation is that component of it, certainly.
Where was the area
I'm sorry.
and they didn't say they couldn't understand how
Which one?
Where was the area where they couldn't understand how they had the information?
Oh, that was in Brooklyn, but I mean, that's happened across the board. The Stingray is an interesting case because there was a gentleman, his name escapes me now, but he was the one that basically, he was a hacker, and he actually crossed all of his T's and dotted all his I's. He knew how people could get him and not, and he was apprehended and was sitting in prison and playing it back and basically marched this thinking all the way down the line to discover that they used one of these Stingrays on him. And I think that he's working on, being released because of, the warrantless use of that device. But they're used all the time. In fact, the police, the head of Obama's chosen few, the president's 21st Century Task Force that we saw in the film, where you have Charles Ramsey, who's the police commissioner of Philadelphia. He says, DC. Before that, he's like, license plate readers. How many people have that? How long before facial recognition gets added to that? We had filmed the LAPD doing that a year before that. So you have the president's chosen few supposed to advise on the future of policing. The chairman doesn't even know that technology was implemented, years. This is the chairman. So this has happened across the board where there's rapid adoption of this technology, but no oversight whatsoever, and often just purposely kept in secrecy. I'm sorry.
You have a like the.
It's okay.
Okay.
So I'm just curious, do you have like any follow-up films? Because I'm not particularly concerned with some of the footage that are being shown. Like, for example, like when I see they show the shootings of the black men, like I personally am not concerned with that. What I am concerned about are the processes around how they present that, or the processes about how they bypass what is actually going on, the martial law, the processes of like, I've actually been banned 1,000 times on Facebook, not just for that, but I posted a video of like corporations, because I used to own a company, going into a prison and having people who are incarcerated actually auctioned out, the way when you go auction for like a bureau or something, like they actually auction the person like that, like this girl, black hat, 5'4", blah blah blah, let's start the bidding at like 2 cents an hour. Like I'm more curious about those type of like behind processes, and I'm wondering if you have any follow-up for that.
The scene that I never got for the film, which I absolutely wanted to hope to still do, in some capacity, although I don't know that anyone will let me in their place now, had to do with Unicor. And we found out that basically, I mean, it's common knowledge, but I found out that Unicor sells prison labor to the Department of Defense for 10 cents an hour. So there used to be companies, American companies, that sold uniforms, camouflage uniforms for the military, who couldn't bid against contract because they were paying people $7 an hour, and Harris Corporation was basically using slave labor at 10 to 40 cents an hour. We also found out that there's a division of Unicor that rehabs the MRAPs when they come back from Fallujah to then be given to police departments. So the last scene in the film I wanted to have is prisoners working on the MRAP to only then be given to police departments to then go make prisoners. And this is a cycle that, you know, obviously continues to happen. Federal prisons are almost impossible to get access to, which is why we didn't. But I think that your question and point brings up a huge issue that needs to still be addressed, which is the private prison industry in general, the formation of it, why it was used, and how it parallels the Nazi model of using prisoners to help with your war effort. I mean, it's across the board. It's nice to see that the Harvard Endowment is de-investing from private prisons, so that's definitely a step in the right direction.
I just wanted to say that actually ties in with what I was going to talk about, where I didn't get his last name. It's Russ from the Persistent Surveillance Group.
Oh yeah, Ross McNutt.
And he makes the point of, and I think also the spokespeople in the LA department make the point of how they're watching social media, and that's used as a predictor. And what I find problematic about that is that everyone knows how hackable computers are. And a lot of low-income people use computers at the library. So all their passwords, you can have a situation where it's not just random, where they can actually want to target someone to make them into a criminal.
Absolutely, sure.
And you can post whatever on their social media, which is supposed to be random, but we know that the algorithms have been changed. So you are then... the opportunities for abuse in that
tremendous, yeah, absolutely. And not only that, the way that those systems work is that as soon as it hits the internet, it captures it. So if like you say something in jest, you'll be like, "Whoa, that might come off the wrong way," and erase it. It's too late. It's already captured. So you don't have an opportunity to self-correct yourself. You know, it's like the whole panopticon thing. You know, if you know you're being watched, it changes your behavior. I think all of these things start to nudge it's nudging behavior in certain directions for control. And the whole mechanism is designed to nudge people in these directions because you know you're being watched, you know you're being controlled, and you start to respond differently. I think that's symptomatic of what you're talking about.
And so where I find that really becomes a problem is especially if you are an activist or someone who is saying, we don't want the funding used for this, you can be targeted.
It's a lot easier to entrap people and to frame people with digital systems, digital currency, Facebook versus an analog form across the board. Absolutely. Sir.
So can I interject one quick question, Craig?
Please.
One thing I wanted to check on is, one of the most gripping things was the New Hampshire city council.
My favorite scene.
So the question is, did you stack that, or I mean, which?
Oh, you're saying where's the opposition?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, was most of the testimony in opposition, and they voted against it anyway, or were there some people who were in favor? We just didn't happen to see.
Have you ever been to New Hampshire?
Yes, but passing through.
Yeah. The live free or die state. No. Yeah, I would say across the board, they were speaking out against this. What's the city right, like Laconia, or a city right across the way? There's three Bearcats already in New Hampshire. So a lot of people, the point was not lost. Why do we need three? It's only so big. If there's an emergency Pulse nightclub shooting, you call for it for another community and they assist. And there's oftentimes like those agreements between communities. The only person that really spoke in favor of it was the testimony from the police chief and his constituencies in the department, and they said, we need this. It's a rescue vehicle, and all this type of rhetoric. So the people that showed up to speak out against it were heavily slanted the other way. I skipped on the police testimony because in the scene previous to that, he was basically echoing the same messaging that Comey was speaking about, is that there's monsters out there and we need this for this type of thing. And I thought it was redundant to just hear this guy speak again. Although maybe it would have been interesting because it could show how the top-down messaging filters through local law enforcement, and that's what they're doing now with fusion centers. And this is a huge component of the future of law enforcement, and it has been slowly creeping this way since 9/11, where each region has a fusion center, and it's the federal, state go-between. And basically all the state municipalities are gathering all this information, but then they're giving it to the feds. And they're, so now you're like almost federal, having a porous, federal-state relationship that continues to erode jurisdictional boundaries. I mean, the only reason why I put the second SWAT raid in the film, where they went to go find guns, is because it's a federal raid. It's an ATF raid. They have the local guys go hit the house, and then they turn it over to the feds. So, posse comitatus, we're not allowed to use the military on the U.S. soil, but yet we outfit everyone with the tools of war and then call them up and tell us to go do their task. I mean, you just see the disconnect there and how they're getting around it. And a lot of it, so much of it, is motivated by asset forfeiture. It's so much motivated by asset forfeiture. Jeff Sessions' wet dream of, how to, ascertain more finances from local poor communities. I mean, the numbers are astounding. $5.1 billion in 2014 seized from American citizens, whereas burglary was only $3.5 billion.
I was wondering how this project morphed for you, what you sort of were expecting going in, and how it changed. I mean, I was surprised by a lot of stuff in your movie, and I was wondering if you were as well.
Sure, absolutely. We started thinking that we were breaking news, that we were going to help people understand what was unfolding in law enforcement. And then Ferguson, we started a year prior to Ferguson, and then Ferguson happened. And everything that was coming out around Ferguson, we were finding completely different things. And it became, how do we interface what we're finding with what the public conversation is happening? And we knew it wasn't going to come out for another year and a half. So we thought while we were making the film for the last year and a half that no one would care about the film. We figured the news cycle would have changed. People have gone on to something else. Maybe reforms that would have happened, and at least window dressing reforms that we think that the situation is now over. Halfway through, it was like mid-2014 when they were talking about pulling out of Afghanistan, and there was a lot of flow of the surveillance technology moving back. What we realized is we kind of, in hindsight, what we were filming was the transition between the war on drugs and the war on terror as it relates to police department, because it always trickles back down home. So that's why we chose to shift gears in almost like the third act of the film and to address their surveillance technology in order to almost future-proof the film, so that when we did release the film a year since Ferguson, it would still be relevant, because we could see that that was the trend of things and that was moving down the line. Everyone else was talking about the guns and the military hardware and the tanks. But even if there's reforms to those programs, that equipment's not coming back. It's already out there. And we knew it was not coming back, so we were thinking, what's coming next? And you can just see this wave of surveillance technology. Why? Because oftentimes that they use technology as a force multiplier. The police department in Dayton told us, the chief's like, I can't hire 10 officers. They need vacation time, they need health insurance, they're prone, they're trigger happy, but I can hire one officer and all of this surveillance, all of this technology, and this officer can control this technology and use it as a force multiplier. So this was the trend in law enforcement, and it is across the board. You're not going to fix policing until you address the for-profit aspect of policing, because you have communities that are deriving 20 to 50% of their operating budget from ticketing your citizens and seizures. Asset forfeiture makes sense on paper. A criminal's hurting your community. You put it into a general fund for the city, and you improve the community. The Fed stepped in a number of years ago and said, listen, if you include one federal agent on your task force, like that raid that we saw in Ferguson, you don't have to put the money into a general fund for your city. You will get to keep 80% for your police department, and we'll keep 20% as a kickback system. So you've amassed, I think it was like $66 million a year, basically, local law enforcement turning in federal adoption and turning in this system of turning their cases over to the feds that then prosecute it. But the problem is the money goes directly back to the department. In a place like Ferguson, you have communities raising their operating revenue from ticketing their citizens. There's a community right next to Ferguson called Jennings. Jennings lost a shopping center one year in 2011. They lost $1 million in sales tax revenue. Right? The very next year, 2012, $1 million more revenue in ticketing their citizens. And there's 90 municipalities in St. Louis County. Why? Because back in the day, they didn't want black people to move to their subdivision. So they incorporated a subdivision and passed laws that didn't allow low-income people to move into those areas. And now each one of those cities has their own police, fire, city aldermen that they have to pay for that they can't afford. So the idea obviously would be to consolidate those cities, but it just brings up the larger point that this is true across the board, that police departments are relying on what they can go out and seize to fund themselves. So you've given people the two tools of war, and then you've given them a financial incentive to go use those tools that they directly benefit from. This is why you see raids go from 3,000 a year in my father's era to 80,000 a year now. It's because of money. And so that component has to be fixed. But if you look at the work that's being done in Michigan State University by Mark Skidmore, he's uncovered $21 trillion missing from the federal budget, from the DoD budget. Since, I believe, they started tracking it post, I think, 1948 onward. 21 trillion missing. Not all money just leaving the ledgers. 900 million coming back on the ledgers. Where's this money? What is going on? This is our money. That's why we can't have a constitutional convention that they would love to call and write all of the laws out of it in order to protect the people that have taken that money. That money needs to be addressed. And if no one's talking about where that money is, how we're using it, you're going to have communities that are going to continue to fail. And when you have MRAPs, rows and rows and rows of them, each costing $1.2 million a piece, it's no wonder why our communities are failing and the cops are having to go out and raise the operating revenue, because we've blown all our money elsewhere. I talked to a lot of cops in Ferguson. They're like, we don't want to write any more tickets. They're like, a lot of us signed up to protect and serve, but we're given a top-down objective that we have to go raise our revenue. We have to go, it's like they're the de facto tax collectors for the community, and then you're double taxing the citizens because they pay taxes, but every time they leave their house in Ferguson, residency requirement. If you leave a house because you spent the night at your boyfriend, girlfriend's house, you leave the house, you get pulled over, you don't have the address match the house that you just came from, ticket. Saggy pants violation, Ferguson, ticket. All of these things that are surrogates for race that allowed people to get ticketed. When I showed up in Ferguson, this much to do about Mike Brown. So much more to do about the excessive ticketing that had been going on for decades that no one could get ahead on. I mean, you had people showing up to pay their tickets in court, leave a 9-year-old daughter in the car, go to leave, get a ticket for endangering a child's life. And it just kept going on and on.
Dred Scott is bigger, just down in the cemetery, just down Forest Hill.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Sad reality.
Yeah, I think we've got two more.
Sure.
I'm sorry, what was the name of the person who was doing the DoD funding?
Really amazing work. Amazing if it ever goes anywhere. Mark Skidmore at Michigan State University.
Thank you for your movie. It was very enlightening. So I have one question about the sources for the data that you provide in the film, because it's evident that there's a lot of impressive research that's gone into the film. I was wondering about the sources for the data, especially with regards to the provision of military equipment to different states, cities in the U.S. by the Department of Defense. What are the sources for that?
What are the sources of that? I could email you the exact sources. I'm not. You're saying how did I cross-reference those figures?
Your research, basically, like where did you...
I mean, a lot of those are government accessible figures.
Are they in the reports to the Senate committees, for example?
Yes. Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, everything. All the facts in the film have been vetted and cross-checked, and by journalistic standards.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Wondering where they're coming from. I mean, yeah, Peter Kraska down at the University of Kentucky is basically the pioneer of militarization of police. He's been talking about it since the late 80s, I believe, and he has tremendous research in this area, quoting a lot of figures. Some of the figures about the number of SWAT deployments a year comes from his work. Some of it's government available information. And some of it I just made up. No, I'm just kidding. Please, yeah, it's Craig at vanishfilms.com if anybody has any follow-up questions or anything else comes up.
Vanish Films.
VANISH. Exactly. Yeah, we'll plug for it.
Yeah, so while watching the film at the David Grossman, I think his name was, teaching session and different footage you showed of police officers, I don't want to make any assumptions, but the majority of them looked to be white, and I just want to maybe question why that is. I mean, I think that obviously there are certain aggressions against minority communities against police officers, but I think it'd be interesting to see if there are any intentional methods that police units use in their application process and their recruiting process to make it more desirable and accessible for white people to be integrated into the police systems.
Mm-hmm. One thing that's almost the reverse of that, which I found out while making the film that was kind of interesting, is that a lot of communities in the suburbs have quotas for diversity. And a lot of the officers of color that come out quickly get poached out to these sleepy communities, and they're in their easier, favorable jobs, not easier, but definitely favorable jobs. And I don't think this accounts for what we saw in the Dave Grossman thing, but it was something of interest because you oftentimes want people of like-minded policing the communities that they find themselves in. And to your point, a lot of these officers that you would see come out of academy never had an interaction with any community other than their own. And they get into, let's say, my father who grew up in rural Connecticut, and he's thrown into a community in inner city Detroit. If Dave Grossman got a hold of him and said, you are men and women of violence, here's your gun, violence is your tool, versus, hey, son, you're here to protect and serve. Welcome to your new community. Go figure out how to survive and how to help this community. It'd be a completely different fabric of law enforcement. And I think of my dad had purchased one of Dave Grossman's books and given it to a friend of his prior to me finishing the film and showing him the film, because he saw him back in the 90s, and he's like, I don't remember his eyes quite so. He's like, it was different back then. And I think Dave teaches 300 days a year. Not one question was ever asked during that seminar. I think you start to believe your own hype. You start to get this God complex. People are taking his scratch paper and asking for autographs. He's just not the person I would want my local officers. There's 63 million police-citizen interactions every year. Dave Grossman says, I'm preparing for the next 9/11. These guys are, next 9/11. Yes, Dave, but there's 63 million police-citizen interactions. And if you think that you're approaching a traffic stop with ISIS in the back seat versus someone who is a member of your community, it creates this wild, difference. And I just think that his mentality is a thread, a significant thread throughout law enforcement. I just think it's time to, call him on that and give him an opportunity to explain why he thinks that that's the best philosophy. I think he'd have a really hard time doing that in what we're asking of our police officers in this day and age. But your observation is correct. I didn't come across anything training that would help, promote racism in the selection process. But I think your observation is absolutely sound, is that oftentimes you have people of completely different racial makeup policing communities that they have no experience with whatsoever. And that further creates that disconnect. A lot of those police officers you saw at the SWAT team competition, the way that they were talking, how they're like this pack and they all go wild boar hunting on the weekends. I'm like, the mentality is the same. You're like hunting people during the week and like hunting animals in the evening. And there's just all these, gray areas that shouldn't be mixing, but just are. It's part of that culture that we continue to, see as we move through.
So I lied. One more. This is the last one.
So,
there's this sort of weird, painfully ironic moment when the officer's arguing with the black kid at the protest, and he's saying, "I've known you since you were." Can you speak on what they were arguing about?
I contacted that officer for a year straight trying to get more interaction with him because I thought he was so interesting in the fact that he engaged with that protester like that. He got reprimanded for engaging in that dialogue during that. His name's Kasem, Officer Kasem. He is one of the greatest people I've ever had a chance of meeting in my entire life. He is a gentle soul. He talks about how he gets out of the car. If he sees a neighborhood barbecue, he will go up to it. He says, the food is great, but I also, dialogue with the community. It was fascinating. We invited him to our screening in St. Louis when we showed the film for the community. He shows up, and he's in plain clothes, not in his uniform, whatever. I asked him to come up, and he joined me for the Q&A. And some woman who had been in Ferguson her entire life raised her hand and says, "Officer Kasem, what happened?" She's like, "We used to run up to the police cars because they all had baseball cards. And all the police officers would give baseball cards to the members of the community, and it just was such a nice thing. We used to run towards the car." This guy, kid you not, reaches in his off-duty jacket, had baseball cards on him. He's like, "I still do it. I still do it. I get a lot of shit from my department, but I still do it." So it's like, this is the guy that you need. He's the one, a group of protesters, 300 strong, were coming down a street. And, they had the eye in the sky, cameras, everything like that. Kasem's telling me this. This is during the Ferguson protest. And the command says, "Hey, listen, group of 300, let's get reinforcements to that corner." And they're like, "Oh, wait, that's Officer Kasem. You're good. Hold back." They knew he could handle it because his approach, his dialogue, his willing to see someone as an individual. He had a troubled youth. He grew up. He had a relationship with the community. He had some sort of compassion. He knew it. That's what's needed. Not Dave Grossman. You're going to go kill someone, have sex with your wife at the end of the night. You need, this is like this conflate. Like, how many steps away is that? Go commit terrorism, and you'll have all these versions. Like, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. So to me, a lot of this gets solved by removing the financial component and rethinking how we train our officers, because the way that we're doing it right now is completely devoid of any type of humanity. And we need to ask, are we creating a human society or inhuman society? And the introduction of the technology is the most important component to consider. Are we creating a human society or inhuman society? Because right now we're on an inhuman trajectory. So
this is a film with Craig himself.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.